This is going to require some context, so if you don't want to hear me talk about some nonsense, feel free to skip to this time code. I feel that it's important because it's going to lay the groundwork as to how I'm going to do this video. With that out of the way, let's talk some serious shit. So about a year and a half ago, I quote tweeted someone who pretty much was mad about a video from Rearez, basically saying that how dare they trash on Balan Wonderworld because apparently some people really like the game. And I mean really, really like the game. And at this point in time, I didn't really have any interest in playing it because I refused to buy a game on Steam that has Denuvo for a single-player game. Seriously, people should have learned out their Sonic Mania, but even they like to use that as an excuse. It's fucking nonsense. And the person who made the original post, me and they had an argument with me, back and forth, pretty much saying stupid shit like, please stop pretending as if game quality is at all objective fact, and please stop having the it's okay to like it even if it's bad smiley emoticon, because, you know, it's not like people judge video games based on if they're actually good or not as far as an interactive media is concerned, or people who really take the let people have fun mindset way too far. Look, I get that people enjoy things and not everyone is gonna like, but when people, especially within the Sonic spectrum, really get on their high horses about some of the most trivialistic shit, including very recently a fucking Burger King ad, I'm surprised this shit didn't blow up when the Progressive ad came out. Seriously, if you arguing about this, you're and you need to stop. Anyway, so I did get Balan Wonderworld for Christmas on the PS5 because, you know, I actually have one, mainly for Demon Souls, but, you know, it's not like no one ever bought a console just for one game. Some PC players like to pretend that they never got a powerful PC just to play that one game, am I right, folks? Anyway, putting the nonsense aside from this year and a half old argument to bed, I finally buckled down and played Balan. About a month later, and I actually beaten the damn thing. Like, legit. I actually beaten it, and I'm kind of surprised it took me as long as it did. Not necessarily speedrunning it, and mainly finding guides on other sorts of the fact, since Balan has some things in there that not many people would tolerate. But because the internet is such a big fucking hug box, I'm going to do the next best thing. Instead of me starting with the things I don't like about the game, I'm going to do the things that I actually like about the game first. And considering I haven't done a 10 things series video in a while, I think the last one I actually did make was of what? The Quake Enhanced version? Awesome job on bringing it to goodoldgames.com. Boo for keeping the Bethesda nonsense. Now, with that out of the way, let's talk about the 10 things I actually like about Balan Wonderworld. Because, believe it or not, there actually are some things that I actually have liked about the game. So, if people still want to throw the game objectively bad, something a piece of art such as a video game flat out cannot be without playing it, I at least would rather play Balan Wonderworld than to replay Modern Doom in a serious tone, or the likes of Elden Ring. Let's get to the 10 things I liked about this shit. Yes, it's real. Inspired by democracy, let's get to it. Yes, I'm being serious. In case you couldn't tell, one thing I really do like to do in these sorts of games is to, well, explore. Assuming the game is designed around that. I'm not going to necessarily knock something like Streets of Rage for not having exploration when it's an arcade-style beat-em-up game. You just kind of go in there, have some fun, and move on. Something like Demon Souls, a game that has a reasonably sizable world to explore that's not overly bloated, unlike Elden Ring. Hell, I even say that something like Ghost Recon Wildland is a lot more easy to get into compared to the likes of Skyrim or Fallout 4. Something about Balan Wonderworld, despite its structure, There's quite a lot to see and there's quite a lot to do, at least when you're playing it for the first time. Given that Balan's structure is chock full of what made Super Mario 64 good, about the polish of it though, but that's for much later, I can definitely say I enjoyed going through each of the game's 12 worlds, finding nifty little things, seeing what works, what doesn't work, and quite frankly, it was a sight to see in each of the game's 12 different worlds, of which have their own themes, which also has to do with the characters in question. So, and even if you're going to backtrack, you'll actually find something you can get to before, therefore scratching that itch of looking under every nook and cranny. So I'll definitely give Yuji Naka some credit that Balan has that exploration itch that is reasonable but without being overly bloated, and actually has a reward for the most part, even if some of the rewards aren't exactly, well, gracious. But I'll give credit when it's warranted. I'll actually give Balan Wonderworld another form of praise in that the main game isn't exactly under 4 hours, which seems to be the thing that a lot of people just seem to hate if a game is under 4 hours. According to HowLongToBeat.com, the main story takes 11 hours, main plus sides take 15, and completionist is double that. If only the game was a lot more polished, this would be a lot more reasonable. And I'm not really sure if there are any nifty speedrunning tricks to let you bypass all of that, but considering that people have a lot of gripes of games that are too short, or too long without being repetitive, considering the likes of Super Mario 64 being nothing but a collectathon of stars, Balan can't exactly be criticized for having the same length as that game, at least when it was new. Its main runtime is pretty reasonable considering the type of game that Balan is. It's not exactly polished, but at least you can't complain the game is too short or too long when a lot of the runtime is doing the same thing over and over and over again. And even when you're going through levels that you've already beaten, you're still going to be finding things you haven't done before. And the structure of the game mostly allows you to not necessarily get every single little thing, but there are some exceptions. But again, we'll get to that later. In case you couldn't tell by the footage from the prologue of this video, this game legit gave me a lot of Kid Chameleon vibes. This could probably be the only bias as far as my tastes in it go, but it actually makes me think that what if Yuji Naka did make a Kid Chameleon game in this style, but without the shittiness that came from Balan? Think about it. You find costumes that give you different abilities, like in Kid Chameleon. You find keys in which to open these diamonds, which are forever, which also give you abilities, like in Kid Chameleon. And you have extra abilities that you can use. Well, I think you get the idea. I know Yuji Naka was the main man who created Sonic the Hedgehog, which is vastly associated with Sega, so in this instance, I couldn't help but think, man, I wish I could be playing Kid Chameleon right now. Which is exactly what I did. Because that game is actually good, and is much better than pretty much every mainline Super Mario game. Except for the no saving part. But considering the game is on a lot of emulators and such other compilations, if it has a save state feature, it shouldn't need to be, well, you know, worried so much. I'll admit this is probably the only real personal bias I have, but I just couldn't help but think, man, this game is just like Kid Chameleon in a really weird way. Even after beating the final boss of Balan Wonderworld, which is essentially a ripoff of Dark Falz and Dark Eater Madeir if they had a bastardized child that somehow survived abortion, the game does have post-game content in which you unlock a secret third act, which allows you to get even more bonus power-ups that you couldn't use throughout the main game. I'm not quite sure if it's possible to get the Balan costume before unlocking this super secret world, but much like with New Super Mario Bros., you do get World 9 for completing the game, albeit unlike in that game we had to get the star coins in every level, you have immediate access to the third act. And yes, in case you can tell, this is me going through the secret third acts for pretty much the first time. Since, if I'm going to be honest, I didn't really feel like re-recording footage on the PC version because that would just be monotonous, and I just got done with this game, and I'd rather just continue where I left off so that I wouldn't have to, well, show off the entirety of the game. But, if I'm going to be honest, some of these post-secret levels aren't exactly the greatest, but they still have that exploration factor that I actually really like, because a lot of these games are getting too damn linear, and if you're into that, that's cool. But me personally, I kind of like to be, let loose a little bit and not having to worry about going on a fucking roller coaster ride. It's why classic Doom is best Doom, and ain't jack shit you can do to change my mind. Yeah, the game actually has local co-op, unlike Super Mario Odyssey, which has some of the shittiest forms of co-op ever made. I'm guessing either Nintendo learned their lesson from people crying about New Super Mario Bros. Being too chaotic, or they have to establish the core gameplay first before they can have two players on the same screen. And if anything goes to show, even fans could do exactly that with Super Mario 64. Nintendo, hire these fine gentlemen. The collectathon itch is something that a lot of people really enjoy when something like Jak and Daxter, first game anyway, or Banjo-Kazooie and all the other fun stuff, tends to give you a lot of things to collect. In this game, it's the costumes, even if some of them are kind of pointless, and of course the statues you need to beat the game, and even beating the bosses, which, to give credit, actually does reset that world so you can recollect things, including getting easy access to rainbow drops in World 6 because of a oversight most likely. But if you enjoy collecting things and other collectathons of the sort, then Balan is probably going to satisfy the itch, provided that you set your expectations a little bit. Which is what I unfortunately had to do, given that, well, shit, I'm going to have to actually play this now. And put aside my biases and just try to enjoy the game, considering that everyone and their mother, including one Dark Lord Jaddle 1, who, in my opinion, is one of the few reliable YouTubers who actually does make his mostly unbiased reviews as much as possible. If you know it sucks, he'll tell you it sucks. But me personally, the collectathon itch is certainly there. It's just not in the best game ever made. Yeah, I kind of went there. And I don't disagree with what he says of being a bad game. Because it kind of is. But we'll get to that later, I promise. This is like the third time I said that. Mostly non-linear design. Let me elaborate by mostly non-linear design. There are at least two power-ups I can recall that pretty much break the flow of platforming, which is essentially the Princess Peach equivalent power-ups from Super Mario Bros. 2. We can walk in the air for a couple seconds, and the most overpowered ability, which lets you do that, albeit while moving up, albeit not getting as much distance, probably to balance the gameplay. See what I did? The gameplay of Balan, at least to me for what I've noticed, is that it's not entirely linear, unlike a certain first-person shooter, which people seem to fucking love for no goddamn reason. What exactly do I mean by mostly non-linear design? Yes, there are some rare instances of where you have to fight an enemy in order to proceed, or to unlock a door, but in those situations, it's mainly not so bad. And besides, all you really get anyway is the teardrops, which don't really do anything in my opinion, but it's there if you want to do combat, and it's not like the enemies are such a major hindrance that you have to stop what you're doing to fight them. Even the so-called sub-bosses of the game mainly comprise of you shooting the fucker 3 times like it's some bastardization of Mario. Wait. Other than the occasional locked door of having to fight enemies to move on, you could essentially retrace your steps if you don't happen to have the correct power-up, or return to Isla Tim's and respawn from the last checkpoint and prepare again. And even when you're not really fighting the enemies, you could essentially retrace your steps if you happen to miss something, or if you already beat the boss, you can beat it again and reset the game progression so that you could get something that you might not have missed. I think that's what I meant to say, but the point is that the game isn't entirely a roller coaster, and you could essentially play the game in any particular order that you see fit, mainly because of how the game is structured initially. You have the first world, in which you collect a certain amount of statues, then the next 2 worlds open up, you collect more statues, and then once you collect enough statues, you open the next tier of worlds, and you keep doing that until you unlock the final door, in which you beat Dark Eater Madeir Fowl's ripoff, and then you beat the game. So kind of like with Super Mario 64, again, essentially the stars you collect will determine what door you can unlock to progress, and it kind of reminds me of that in a very vague way. Since the levels may not be exactly the most demanding, but you can at least tackle it in almost any order that you see fit. So, in terms of replay value, I will give Balan that. It's not Doom Eternal levels of linear, but it certainly ain't as polished as the better single-player FPS game that isn't Modern Doom. Man, I bet people are gonna get on my case for that, and honestly, go fuck yourselves. Despite the game's pretty blatantly broken power-ups, you can usually tackle most of these puzzles if you use your head or use the blatantly broken power-ups, which trivializes the game's platforming. Or if you want to be an asshole, you could costume swap and gain some invincibility frames, which I think is something the game designers did not even think was a mechanic, but I'm just going to go ahead and assume that it is, because I actually did somewhat abuse this during the final boss when there's 5 lances coming at you, because, you know, the Lance Vance Dance is certainly the hardest attack to dodge in the game, and not even leveling up adaptability can save your ass. Or if you level up attunement. Or if you put on that ring that boosts your adaptability. Or if you put on the work hook, which lowers adaptability, in which you lose iframes. Which is complete bullshit, by the way. And not just because people want to bitch about that, but because it actually doesn't do that. There are some situations in Balan where you could use the blatantly broken power-ups to bypass things. But regardless, you're not exactly punished if you don't solve the puzzle in the one correct way. There might be some abilities that you have to get using a specific one, mainly Ladderman. Seriously, what the fuck is this design? To get the most broken ability in the game, which seriously gives me some Sonic the Hedgehog vibes, at least when you look at it from a good distance. That's just me though. Or in the rare case of, wow, I can't believe they actually did that, the rest of the game, at least to me, didn't feel like, wow, I actually tried something and I failed because of it. So, it's not like the game has invisible walls or anything. You could kind of break the game like a twig, and that's perfectly fine, since, despite the game's collectathon paywalls of statues, it at least doesn't punish you, unlike a certain... Okay, I'll stop. You could find different ways of playing this game, and you're usually not punished for it. So I will give it that. These next two are kind of more or less stating the obvious, but I'm just going to lump them together because I have nothing better to do and I want to wrap this shit up. The game is multi-platform, which means that people who want to complain about everything needs to be on everything, Balan has you covered, and despite being developed by Square Enix, there's no shady business practices, the game doesn't have microtransactions unlike the shitty Chocobo racing game, which nobody fucking asked for, there's no pay-to-win nonsense unlike in their Marvel's Avengers game, the game has more gameplay than The Quiet Man, and even though it's not Final Fantasy, you could tell there was some sort of love and care, at least from Yuji Naka's side of things. So, whether there is business meddling or not, it doesn't stop people from rightfully criticizing this game. Which, get ready son, because we're gonna criticize the fuck out of this game. $60, please. Wait a minute. They changed it to 70? What the fuck? Damn it. Well, gonna have to go to the bank. Well, see you in part 2. AMSR, crackle knocking goodness.